Welcome to Fostering to Forever. My name is Diane Dexter, and I'm the Adoption Chief for the state of Vermont. I've been in my position for the last 28 years, and I will be getting ready to retire this next month. And I just want to thank Janet Connor and the UVM Training Partnership for giving me this opportunity to make this video for you. In this video, we're going to be talking about several things. The most important thing is that you are here and you're taking this class. Now, you might ask yourself, why is it important for me to take another class when I've already gone through all of the fostering classes? But this class is specifically to help you to begin to understand your role if and when you become an adoptive parent or a parent through a guardianship. And providing permanency for a child in foster care is one of the highest degrees of commitment that any one of us can make. And it's very different from being a foster parent. When you're a foster parent, the social workers, the state, the schools, they make all the decisions for your child. When you adopt that child or you take guardianship of a child, you become the person who makes all of those decisions. And it's very important that you understand that there's this transition that you're going to go through. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about adoption and permanency for children from the adult perspective. So what are some of the kinds of changes or things that you as parents, as you embark on this journey, are going to need to be successful? And then we're going to talk a little bit about the children and what it is that they need and what they need from you, what they need from their community, from their schools, and some of the challenges that they may encounter. The last area I want to cover is the area of permanency options. And I already mentioned that there's adoption and there's guardianship. But there's also another process in which people become custodial parents, and that's through something called a conditional custody order, or a CCO. And I'm going to help you to understand how you can move from a conditional custody order into becoming an adoptive parent or a parent through guardianship. So these are the things that we're going to be chatting about. Okay, so I want to take us back now to the beginning and why it's so important that you as adults are listening to this tape and that you're thinking about this commitment that you're going to be making. You may be a relative, you may be a foster parent. You're all here because you wanted to do something. You wanted to provide care for a youngster who was in need. And that is really a very wonderful thing to do. But it's going to take more than just the desire and the commitment and the love to be successful with children who've experienced a tremendous amount of trauma. So what do the children need from us as adults? Well, the first thing they need from us is they need us to be adults. They need adult systems that they can bump up against and bounce off of and know that those adult systems are going to firmly hold, and we're going to be able to contain them and their special needs and their emotions and all of their trauma. Now, this is an easy thing to say. It is not an easy thing to do. And in my experience over the years, I've talked to many, many, many families who have gone through what you're about to go through, which is adopting and becoming the guardian of a child who has a traumatic history. One adoptive mother who had a child who, we would talk on the phone pretty consistently. And I said to her, how do you do this every day? How do you get up every day knowing that you're going to face another day of this child's tantrums, of their refusals, of their not wanting to go to school? How do you do it? And she said, I go in my room and I have the clothes that when Susie moved into my house, I have those clothes in a plastic bag. And I go in my room and I shut the door and I get that plastic bag out and I sit on the edge of my bed and I smell those clothes. And I remember how frightened and little and traumatized Susie was when she came to my home. And sometimes I sit there and I cry and I get my empathy back. That's one of the key elements to being a successful parent of children with traumatic histories, is that you have to come from a place of empathy for the child, not sympathy. They don't need you to feel sorry for them, but they do need you to understand that they're not doing this to spite you, to get even with you, even though they're going to say those words to you. Really, they're doing this because they don't know how else to react, because their own internal systems are off kilt. And one of our jobs as an adoptive parent and as an adult system is to stay on kilt, to keep ourselves as evenly consistent and emotionally regulated as we can, because it's this emotional regulation that we demonstrate that allow children to begin to learn how to regulate their own emotions. So how do we do that as adoptive parents? Well, one of the things I like to think about is having a tool belt and having tools in my tool belt. So one of the main tools I have is humor. And for those of you who've met me in person or hung out with me or spent time with me, you'll know that I have a wacky sense of humor. So anytime that you can use humor to break up a particular situation, to change a child's mind, to move them from a place of stuckness to a place of laughter, you have been successful. And, you know, Bruce Perry will talk about brain development, and I'm sure you've taken all those classes. Well, you have now impacted that child's brain in ever so slight of a way, but it's the beginning. And it's those events thousands of times, day in and day out, that help children really heal from the trauma of abuse and neglect. And neglect really is a very traumatic thing for children. When children are neglected as infants, they don't learn the reciprocal cycle of trust and bonding and getting their needs met. And those children need a tremendous amount from us as adults. So humor is a wonderful tool to have in your tool belt. Another tool, as I said earlier, are adult systems. You and your partner and your parents and your siblings, you still have to be the grown-ups. And you want to raise your children with the understanding that there's a difference between the generations and that those differences are important. That grandma is not your friend that you can yell and scream and swear at. That doesn't work. Grandma is grandma, and we respect our elders in this family. Respecting parents, respecting the aunts and the uncles, and that you as the adults act like adults, except for those moments when you're being silly and you're using your humor. Another piece is that if you are married, if you are in a committed relationship and you have a spouse or a significant other, that you do adult things. Your whole world cannot focus on the children. You really need to be able to go out into the world with friends. Your kids need to see you have fun as adults, because that's part of becoming having that normalizing experience, that grown-ups do things children aren't invited to, and that's okay. Another component of the adult systems is being aware of how you're treating each other. A lot of our children have grown up in domestic violence, and as adults, we have to be very conscientious about how we treat each other within our family system, because they're watching us. They're watching us intensely. They're waiting for that moment when things don't go right and everything explodes, because has been their experience. Now, I'm just speaking in general, that many of the children have been through these kinds of experiences. And even those infants even babies who have experienced domestic violence in the first 6 months of their lives, and neglect and those things, even those youngsters have some kind of imprint, and they're waiting for that other shoe to fall, so to speak. One of the other tools that you should have in your tool belt is to know your community. Who's at the school, who's in the therapy, who's at mental health, who's who. If you don't have post-adoption supports and services, you might want to inquire about them. If you're within 3 months of finalizing your adoption, that's a really good time frame to inquire about post-adoption services and supports. Having the knowledge of who's who in my community, who do I call when this? It is all of us a very natural reaction when we adopt a child to want to sort of circle the wagons, as they say, and just embrace the child within our family systems and get rid of all those helping professionals. We've had enough. I've had enough visitations and social workers and all of these pieces in my life. Now I just want to go off and be a regular family. Well, I'm sorry to inform you that when you're adopting a child with special needs through the foster care system, you're never going to be a regular family. You're always going to be a really special family. Not that you're not going to have those regular moments of family time and holiday seasons and family vacations and all of that, but you're always going to have to be aware from the child's perspective. How are they interpreting this? How are they seeing it? Are we setting off their triggers? And you have to be sort of at the ready, because your child may have a meltdown at any moment in time. And what you want to be able to do is not be embarrassed, not be ashamed, not, feel, oh my God, this is terrible, awful, but be prepared. Okay, you need to have that old Girl and Boy Scout model of be prepared. You want to have the tools in your tool belt. So if your child has a meltdown somewhere, you have some things that you can do, some things that have been tried and true for you. And remember, humor is really, really an amazing tool. Most of our kids can respond to some kind of humor. Some of the other things that parents need is love is not going to conquer all. Love is really important, and our kids know whether or not we love them or not. They know whether or not they're second-class citizens in our home. They know whether or not we have fully embraced them into our family, and it's as if they were born to us. That's what adoption means. They know. And if you're uncertain or you're unsure, sometimes talking about it is a better strategy than pretending it doesn't exist. Sometimes really having frank conversations with a child, I'm not talking about a 3-year-old, but a 9, 10, or 11-year-old, sitting down and saying, it's a little challenging getting used to having someone so big in my house. I haven't had a 9-year-old in my house before. I've never parented a 9-year-old before. Tell me what you think a parent needs to know about parenting a 9-year-old. Always look to solicit from the youngster what their ideas and thoughts are. You'd be surprised how far this will go. One of the other areas that I want to talk about with you for our tools in our toolbox is the area of being able to limit the size of our family. One of the things in adoption that a lot of foster parents and relatives will get caught up in is social workers are going to call you about children all of the time. They have children on any given day who need families, and they're going to be calling you. And you have to really pay attention to what it is I can do in my family. If you have one child with a lot of special needs, that might be your limit, and that's okay. In the broader world of adoption and social work and permanency, if you can parent one child successfully, you have done a fabulous thing for that child. Sometimes a sibling may come along. One of the things that I really want people to pay attention to is how many different genetic combinations you're adding to your family structure. And I'm not worried about the genetics of, that of diabetes and mental illness, but just all those things are things we do have to pay attention to. And all the different kinds of quirkiness that come in those genetic relationships. If you're parenting 5 children and they have 5 different birth mothers and 5 different birth fathers, you have taken on an awful lot. And those things are going to play out over time. And that's going to cause your family a lot more work in some respects. And not that work is necessarily bad, but it is going to be more challenging to regulate all of those different needs that the youngsters are going to have. One of the other areas of genetics is that families adopting transracially or transculturally. I'm an adoptive parent. I have 2 children that I adopted. I'm also a parent through guardianship. I took guardianship of a niece when she was 13. My children are African American. And when I stepped into this world, it wasn't about bringing a Black child into my family and making them white. It was about me becoming part of my daughter's Black community and learning as much as I could. She's 25 years old now, and one of the things that she gets complimented on quite a lot is her hair. And everyone wants to know, well, if you grew up with a white mother, how did you learn how to do hair? And she's like, my mother learned how to do my hair. She spent a lot of time, and I watched a lot of videos because she sat there practicing and practicing. And that's something that she and I will always share. She says, I have a lot of respect for you, Mom, because you went out of your comfort zone. So those are the kinds of things that you want to pay attention to as an adoptive parent, limiting how many different types of children you bring into your family system. When you are a kinship person, when you are an aunt or a cousin or a grandparent, and you are going to be adopting your niece or nephew or grandchild, you already have that genetic connection. You already understand some of the little quirks. I'm an adoptive parent of 2 children, and I took guardianship of a niece. As a kinship person, my genetic relationship with my niece was very different from that. I share no genetics with my adopted children. But with my niece, there is this bond. There is this history that goes back in time. And I want to tell you a little story about when she very, very first came to my house. One of our first dinners is we're all sitting around the dining room table. We're having dinner. Everybody's chatting. Everybody's getting along. Things are going really well. And my niece takes the palm of her hand and she says, "Ay, Kurish," like this. And my kids both, their heads like swivel to me. And they're like, "Mom." And I'm like, yep. That's because she's part of our family. This is an act in my family that's been from generation to generation, to when you get excited or you're overwhelmed or something really is interesting to you, you go and you do this Ai Kurish, which is a Portuguese act, which means Ai Kurish kind of means like, oh my God, or it actually means lightning, like it's like a lightning bolt that came and you got this idea or whatever it may be. And so here was my niece at age 13 with my children who were, I think, 11 and 7 at the time. And she's demonstrating that my kids had seen me do all of my life. And here's my niece doing it out of the blue. That's genetics. That's that connection that only that familiar relationship can provide. And it's really a tool in your toolbox that you can use with your kinship relationships with children, but it's also something to pay attention to when you're adopting children that are not genetically related to you, because there are many factors that can play out over time, and it can be very, very challenging to be able to meet the needs of all the children. I mean, I'm speaking lightly about something that's cute and funny, but there are many other factors that can become very challenging. Another tool in your toolbox is it's really important not to pathologize your child. I've been to a lot of foster parent conferences, and people will come up to me and they'll say things like, "Oh, I'm getting ready to adopt, and I'm adopting a child with ADHD and RAD and bipolar disorder," and they tell me about their child through their child's diagnoses. And this is something that is alarming to me. And it's something I want to help each of you understand, that while our children may have diagnoses, while they may have conditions and situations that are challenging, that is not who they are. And to sort of describe our child by their conditions is to really do a disservice to them. And we don't want to do that, because any one of us on any given day have all kinds of things that go wrong with us. But we don't spend our time thinking about that. We think about, today I'm going to drive over to the general store, I got to pick up milk and bread, I got to this, I got to that, whatever it may be. And our kids need that same normalcy. They need to have the opportunity to be kids growing up in a family. Yes, they have issues. Yes, they take medication. Yes, they're in special ed. Yes, all those things are true, but that's not who they are. They are not what their alphabet soup describes. They are kids who also need to have fun. They need to laugh. They need you to see them as children and not as little adults or as little problems. And that really is an important piece. And it's an important part as a parent when you transition from fostering your child to being the parent of your child. It's important you don't let other people talk like that about your youngster, especially in front of your youngster. When you're at an IEP meeting and they're talking about your child's diagnosis or the most recent evaluation, and your child is sitting there, don't allow that to happen. Say, stop. Stop, we're not going to do this here. Or even before the meeting, let people know, we're not going to talk about my youngster's diagnoses. We're going to talk about their strengths. We can talk a little bit about what they need to be successful, but this is a strength-based conversation, because our kids need that from us and they deserve that from us. So now I want to switch gears a little bit, and we've kind of gone a little back and forth between what we as adults have as far as tools in our toolbox, and now I want to talk about our children. And I've talked a little bit about some of what our kids need. Our kids need to go outside and they need to play in the dirt. Really, that's what they need. Sometimes if one of our children has a condition that doesn't allow them to do something like that, they might need that laptop. They might need that iBook or iPad in order to entertain themselves. Many youngsters use those devices as tools for communication. If you have a child that cannot talk to you because they have a condition often referred to as on the autism spectrum disorder, then that becomes a tool for your child. And that is a tool that we don't use as a reward and punishment, because it's their communication device. The other thing children need from us is they need to know that they're special in our eyes, that given at the end of the day all the trials and tribulations that we've gone through, that we are tucking them in that night and that we care about them, we care what happens to them in the future, and that we have the stick-to-itness to stand by them. And the children, what they're going to say is, all right, let's see, I'm going to pull the dog's tail. Do you love me now? I'm going to put pinholes in the plastic milk jug, in the refrigerator, and the milk is very slowly going to be seeping out. And do you love me now? I'm going to dump the cat litter into the toilet and flush it, and the entire system is going to seize up. Do you love me now? They're always looking for that place, that activity that is going to cause you to reject them, because that's what they're used to. If you're adopting a 9 or 10-year-old from the state system, that youngster has probably been rejected many times. The number of placements a child has had matters. It really matters. Kids that have had 15 placements are very different from kids that have had 1 placement. And you need to understand that parenting that child is going to be very different. We call it, in the field of post-permanency services, we call it adjusted parenting. Whatever you learned as a parent, whatever you do with your biological children or your nieces or your nephew, you're going to have to adjust yourself to this child. And if you have more than one child in your home, how you parent one and how you parent the other may be very different. This is a very hard task. And this is, again, why I really recommend parents limit the number of children that they take into their family. Because you don't know what the future holds. None of us do. If we had crystal balls, we'd be all set, wouldn't we? But we don't. So what is true for a child at 2 and 3 is not going to be true for them at 9 and 10. And at 14 and 15, life is very different. I have a dear friend who adopted 4 little girls, and they're very close in age. In fact, 3 of them are like the triplets because they're so close in age. Adolescence has been hell for her because all 4 of these girls in adolescence all at once, none of which are related to each other, has really pushed these parents beyond the coping point. They have had to seek out other kinds of supports. They've had to call upon friends, upon extended family, and they've been able to do that. This, again, is getting back to the toolbox that you as adults have. And don't circle the wagons and close out the help systems. You really want to leave a window open so the help systems can come in when you need them and just before you think you need them. One of the funny parts about raising children is that you never know when they're going to have their big meltdowns. And I can remember being in the mall with my 2.5-year-old who was very large for her age. And she just decided she had had it. She was tired. She was hungry. We needed to be out of there. She threw herself on the floor. Because she was such a large girl, I could not pick her up. I couldn't pick her up, throw her over my shoulder, and carry her out of the mall. So I had to stand by and let her have her temper tantrum. And some woman came over and said something to the line of, "You're too big to be having a temper tantrum. Get up and stop acting like that." And I had to turn to the woman and say, she's 2.5. She's entitled to her temper tantrum. She might look bigger to you, but you know what? This is normal for her. It's okay for her to have a temper tantrum here in the middle of the mall. And I just stood by and let her have it over. And when she was done, she got up and we moved along. Sometimes our children need us to allow them to be, just to be, whatever it might be in that moment, and to not try. And this is a very challenging thing when you have to get to work. But there are a lot of youngsters who cannot get out the door in the morning. Leaving this home, this sanctuary, this place, isn't just about getting up, getting dressed, and going to school. Leaving the house can be a very traumatic thing because that youngster may have had 4 or 5 or 6 different times in their life when they've left a home and never come back. And their entire world changes. So getting up and going to school in the morning can be a huge trigger for our youngsters, especially if they have been older children when you adopt them. So thinking about the world from the child's perspective is a very important tool in your toolbox. And if you need help to do that, then there are helpers out there. There are post-permanency support services. There are licensed private social workers. There are community mental health therapists and case managers. And keep asking the questions over and over. Keep asking yourself. So what does this look like from Billy's perspective? What does this look like from Jenny's perspective? How would they interpret this? Some of the other tools that you can use or activities, we spoke a little bit about humor. Well, some of the other things is that our kids love to play games, but they can't play board games. So hand games, the clapping games, even those baby games where you're doing the left hand, right hand crossovers. Sometimes when I'll take a bunch of children out, I'll buy 5 or 6 different kinds of ice cream, and then and there's spoons in every one, and everybody gets to try everything, and you feed everybody else, and you're doing all that left brain, right brain crossover stuff, and you're nurturing the child at the same time. These are all the kinds of things that our kids need us to do over and over and over and over again. Holly Van Goulden is a writer and a well-known therapist and a national personality, I guess I want to call her. She grew up here in Vermont. She's written several books. One of her books is The Dance of Attachment. And Holly is just probably one of my favorite people to talk about what it is that our kids need from us and looking at the world from the child's perspective. That's a very, she's really good at helping us to understand that. In conclusion, I really want to talk with you about adoption and what it really gives, not only to you as parents and to your family, but also what it does for our society as a whole. When you adopt a child through foster care, you really are intervening in the most profound way in that youngster's life. You are claiming that child as your child, bringing them into your family structure. You are also entering into possibly their extended family structure. So all the positive things that you bring to that situation get handed down. I think of a dear friend of mine who adopted an infant through foster care, and the biological mother was a woman who went on to have several other children. And that woman who adopted that first child, she did not ignore the biological mother and the other children. She made sure that the other children had clothes and they had toys and they had things that they would need as to be children growing up. When I think about how adoption impacts the world of child abuse and neglect, it impacts by breaking that cycle, because I bring this child into my home and I raise this youngster and I help the youngster to heal from the trauma that they've experienced. One of the things that I can tell you is that the children in my program that are on adoption assistance, we've got 2,025 youngsters in the program. Not one of them is in adult prison right now. These kids graduate from high school. They tend to get paying jobs. We try to help them delay pregnancy, and they do. Adoption helps to delay early parenthood. And even when our youngsters do have children, who do they seek for guidance and support? They come back to us as adoptive parents. They come to us for that guidance and support. And so perhaps that youngster now won't have to experience the abuse and neglect that my child experienced, because they have me now in their life and they have my extended family in their life. So I see adoption as a very powerful tool for dealing with poverty and child abuse and child neglect. It is a way of improving our society as a whole. And in return, it enriches my life as an adult. I have had experiences with my kids that I never thought I would ever experience. With my niece, I never thought I would be sitting outside of the Barry Opera House till 11 o'clock at night while she's rehearsing for the musical Cats. That I'm not musical. I can't carry a tune. But here was this little girl with this lovely voice. I provided the opportunity. She did the rest. I never would have seen myself as a hockey mom. Okay, cold and late nights don't mix with me. My youngest daughter decided to play hockey. I became a hockey mom. I was a hockey mom for 3 years. That is a huge commitment. But when I saw what it did for my daughter and what it did for her self-esteem and her overall persona at school, it really made a big difference. I wouldn't have had that experience. My oldest daughter was a dancer. And she went into high school with her claim to fame as being a dancer. She was a beautiful young girl who was going to be very, very tall in life. And I knew of friends of mine who were tall, and they always felt like they had to hunch over and that they couldn't quite stand up to their full height. And I thought, how can I help my daughter? Well, I can help her by putting her in dancing school because that will give her the technique and posture to be, in my terms, a long drink of water. That's what I used to tell her all the time. You're going to grow up to be a long drink of water. And it was a very lovely way to help her to cope with being extremely tall in a very short family, because I'm 5 feet tall, my niece is 4'11", and my other adopted child is 5'1". So we were a very short family, and here was this one girl who was going to be very different from us. It was a way of really sort of encompassing her and the enrichment that it brought. I had someone now who could reach the top shelf. We used to joke about this all the time, and she used to tease me with, "Oh, when I grow up and go away, Mom, you're going to miss me because there's not going to be anyone here who can reach the top shelf." It was her place in our family. Now, I'm joking with you, of course. She has a much bigger place in my family. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about adoption, is that the child has a place within your family. You allow for it. You make room for it. And you have a place within their extended family structure. If you ever get the opportunity to meet their extended family, if you get the opportunity to reconnect with them over the years, this will be a something you should absolutely check out first as an adult, because that's what we do as adults, but then embrace it and get to know all that you can. Many of my friends who've adopted internationally talk about going back to their child's place of birth and trying to find whatever kinds of connections that they can find. And it's very challenging for them. In foster care, you have that connection right here, right now. Take the pictures, get to know them. You have to be wise. You have to keep safety as a paramount factor in these situations. But by and large, you'll find that parents love their children even when they're not able to care for them. And if you can extend that olive branch and you can extend that openness to them, they will also be very grateful to you for parenting their child, for taking their child. And this is true especially within kinship, and why kinship adoptions work out really well, usually for everyone involved. I think that adoption is just a really blessed way to grow a family, and it gives a child something that they didn't have. So it's a win-win. Thanks.